Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast number 112.
It's going to be a great episode.
It is, and because we have an anniversary going on here. This is your 1 year.
It is. I will have now done every month for a whole year.
I actually kind of time flew.
Yeah, I really did.
I didn't really realize that it was been a year since you've been on the show with me. That's great.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for making it better.
Anytime.
So, we have a lot going on we need to talk about, but let's talk first about this guest, because I am super excited. For anyone who's listened to the podcast for any number of years, you may remember when we had Joe Navarro on, but it was way back in episode 100, or not even one, let's say 14.
Wow.
Way back in episode 14 in 2010 when he was on. So now we jump forward almost 8 full years, actually a little over 8 full years, because it was October of 2010 that he was on. And now we're in December of 2018, and he's going to come back on the show. And since then, Joe has published a number of brand new books, and I'm holding one in my hand right here called The Dictionary of Body Language, which is just what it sounds like. It's a phenomenal book, and we're going to talk to him about why he developed this dictionary. Such a compact, easy to use book for anyone who is into nonverbals. But there's also so many other things Joe is doing that we're interested in. So why don't we take a quick breather and get Joe on the show? We are back on the show with Joe Navarro. Joe, it's great to have you here today.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's been too long.
It really has. I was just talking to Kat about it, saying it's been since 2010. We got to make these shorter visits from now on.
At least a little bit more frequently. What do you say, Kat?
I would agree. Otherwise, we're going to have to speak like super quickly to squeeze in 8 years of content in the next few minutes.
I think so. Well, you guys have been busy. I know I have. So it's great to be back together.
Yeah, thank you. So in the last 8 years, you've written, I think, 4 new books?
4 books in the last 8 years. And it just seemed like yesterday I was working on Dangerous Personalities and Louder Than Word, some of these other books that I've been working on. And of course, this year I finally published what so many people had asked for, which was the Dictionary of Body Language. So it's been a busy 8 years.
Now, I want to talk about that book, because that book, even though it's relatively new, mine looks like it's a couple years old because I carry it in my laptop bag for travel. I'm going to give you a plug here on this, because what I truly love about it is that it's very compact and it feels easy to flip through. Like, it's not a giant book. It almost fits in your hand perfectly. And you didn't spend a ton of time with pictures filling the book up. You did a great job at just giving us little snippets of saying, okay, I want to know what this means when someone, holds a fist in front of their neck. And I could turn to that page, read it, and be like, yes, I understand it now. What was the motive for writing this book, and how long did it take you?
Well, thanks for the question. For a long time, I'd been keeping these notebooks with these one-paragraph comments. Over the years, I had a collection of, I think, 4 or 5 total small notebooks, and I had a collection of over 1,000 observations. And I was talking to my agent, Steve Ross, and we were talking about, what do the readers want? And I said, this new generation of readers, a lot of them ask for something that's almost in bullet format, not a lot of writing, just something that they can quickly go to and read. And he said, do you have any stuff like that? And I said, well, all my observations are in bullet format. I don't sit there and write, 10 pages on one observation. Usually it's just a paragraph. So I showed it to him, and he said, well, why don't you throw that together, but do it in a quick format so that people who maybe they're not familiar with a lot of body language stuff can go to it quickly and say, why is it that when some people are emphasizing, their thumbs pop up, but other times they disappear? What's the meaning of that? And so that's how the thinking behind the Dictionary of Body Language, but then it's how do we get it down into a manageable book? I whittled it down to 400 plus behaviors. And And I have to say, the reaction from the public has really been astonishing.
You accidentally wrote a best-selling book like over the years.
Well, Kat, you bring up a good point. If you add up all this stuff, after some time, there's quite a bit there. And I just didn't realize it because intermingled with in between all these things, there's travel related stuff, complaining about airline queues and, traffic getting to the airport. But when I went through it, there was enough material there. In fact, there was so much material that I had to cut quite a bit out. A clinician contacted me and he said he loved the book because he said, when he was a medical student, you go from high school, you're studying chemistry and math and all this stuff. Then you're in college, you're in pre-med. Then you go into medical school. Then you're in residency, all this stuff. And he says, I never really had time to study people. And I never really had time to study the social sciences. And so, like you, Chris, he keeps it at his side in his office and he says, I can refer to it because there's many times where I see a behavior, I think I know what it means, but I don't know. In fact, he said, I've seen people, purse their lip forward. And he says, I never realized that meant that the person is either dubious or is thinking of something alternatively. And now he knows. So it was gratifying to hear that from a professional.
You have these notebooks.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you making these observations? Is it just in public?
Oh, everywhere. My wife will tell you I travel with the little notebook and I'll see something. And if I see it for the first time and I don't recognize it or it's a little strange, I'll make a note of it. Like one day I'm watching this person in line and their ankle is going sideways so that they're rocking back and forth, but on the side of the foot. I made some notes on that. And it's a behavior you don't often see, but it's one that's very effective when people are upset. They'll do this behavior, or if they're anxious to, get inside like a stadium or something, you see this rocking behavior at the ankle level. I'm not officially an anthropologist, but I view the world as an anthropologist, which is why do humans do these things? And then I try to understand it.
You wrote that observation down. You saw this young lady rocking back and forth on her ankles. Now, how did you go from the observation to figuring out what it meant?
Yeah, so there's two ways. I remember Dr. Joe Koulas teaching me that he says, if you see a behavior, act it out and see how it feels. And if you get a chance, talk to the person. Fortunately, I was behind this young lady, and sure enough, when she got to the counter, she was upset. She was upset that she had taken the wrong item home and was complaining about it. And it was that physical manifestation that led me to that observation. And then since then, of course, I've seen it other times. And, you travel a lot, Chris, and you see it at the airport with people that are upset with the gate agent. You'll see this rocking sideways, which you don't usually see, but it's very indicative that something's bothering them.
Is the rocking the anxiety or is that the self-soothing mechanism?
Great question, Kat, because any repetitive behavior serves to calm us down. So whether it's a woman playing with her hair, rolling her hair in her fingers, or a man playing with his beard, or sometimes just massaging our own hands, anything that is repetitive, including chewing gum, serves to pacify us. All day long, our brain says to us, hey, do things that are calming. This is just one more of them.
I feel like a little stupid right now because your connection to figuring it out is something that Dr. Ekman taught me about facial expressions, but I never really thought about applying that same thing to body language. Like he would say, if you really want to know what a facial expression, kind of emotion it will create it. Do what you saw on the person you were noticing, log your emotions, then, do it a few more times and see if you always feel the same way. And now you can say, okay, this means this. And what a fascinating idea. You just said, like, to do that with body language also, and then see what kind of feeling or emotion it creates in you while you're doing that.
Yeah, Paul Ekman is right. The feedback loop of the do the behavior and then see how you feel. I think it was Paul Ekman who said, bite down on a pencil and that forces you into a grin and see if that doesn't change your mood. And it does. Or as you walk down the street, don't look down, but actually look at the tops of buildings. And that will, for many people, will elevate your mood. So, there is a feedback loop that when we do these behaviors, we also will feel them.
That's really interesting. So you went through, basically took these notes, or you observed people, then either was able to hear like that one story, ask, or recreate it yourself. And then from that, because I know how hard that is, written a few books myself, making what you've done here, like I can open up to any page, right? I have it here sitting on my desk. So I'm just gonna open up to a page here. We got coughing or clearing of throat. And you took that, you could probably have written a chapter on it, and you have 1, 2, 3 sentences that perfectly define what that could mean from a nonverbal perspective. So how did you then probably take all of the things that you had understanding about that and boil it down to just short little paragraphs that help us to understand this?
That's where the writing and the great editing, I had a great editor at HarperCollins to help me whittle it down. But it's funny you picked on that one because to this day, I still remember Robert Gates was testifying before Congress. He was head of the Department of Defense. The congressperson was asking him a question which was classified, and he didn't want to answer it. And invariably, when he had to give let's just say a prevarication out of necessity, because he's not going to reveal secrets, he would always give a cough and clear his throat. I had observed that hundreds of times in interviews. But if you were to go through the book, I can go back to every instance where I made those observations because, as you know, Chris, I stop and think about these things and ponder, well, why do we have this behavior? Why would nature compel this from us? Some of the behaviors are easy, right? So when we hear a loud noise, we freeze. When we're scared, we freeze in place. Well, why? Large felines. We evolved or we were gifted this ability to deal with large predators, mostly large felines, to avoid the chase, trip, bite sequence by the freeze response.
I love that chase, trip, bite.
So that one is easy to explain, but then we have other behaviors that we say, well, why do we do that? Well, we do certain behaviors because we want to emphasize, we do some because we're attracted to somebody. So there's any number of reasons, but it's something that for whatever weird reason I've always been interested in.
There may be people who didn't hear our conversation 8 years ago. So maybe you can just back up and tell us how you first started even noticing that nonverbal communications were going to be an important part of your life.
Well, I came to the United States as a refugee from Cuba right after Fidel Castro took over. I thought we were going back, and I didn't speak English, so nonverbals really became the common language, if I can borrow from Game of Thrones, the lingua franca. For me, as I, was learning English, it was the one reliable language that I could rely on when people were happy to see me, when people were disappointed with me. You certainly saw it in their faces. And this stuck with me. And then, once I was in college and I had the opportunity to really dive deep into this area by studying anthropology, sociology, and taking classes in psychology, this really prepared me for when I became an FBI agent at the age of 22, where all of a sudden, I'm confronted with this new profession and come to realize that 99% of what we do is really about observation. It's about watching criminals. It's about observing them during interviews, and that invariably the most successful people in the Bureau were those that could read, interpret, and utilize body language.
When you were in the FBI, was that a common practice? Or, of course, you're filtered by what you see on TV, but in the real world, was it common for agents to want to use interview tactics that used nonverbals? Or was that kind of new when you started doing it?
Great question. I think good investigators used it without really knowing the science behind it. What I found was that even when I went through the academy in 78, that, yes, Kat, there was the time period back in 78.
He heard the gasp. I heard it.
I heard the exhale. Okay, it didn't escape me.
He does this for a living, Kat. Don't mess, okay?
I'm watching you. So,
how is this joke like a thing with everybody? Does Chris read people in on company jokes?
I don't. I really. That was all natural. I promise.
Believe me, no one will have Chris and I at the same party.
I would 100% have both of you at the same party.
Yeah, we will definitely spoil that Mountain View. I think some people were using it, but they weren't aware of the science behind it. By the time I got involved with it, that's when we started bringing in people like Dr. Paul Ekman, Bella DePaulo, Dr. Joe Koulas from the University of Chicago, Mark Frank, Judy Burgoon. I mean, these were the giants. And of course, a lot of their work had been in the laboratory. And what we were blending with them, because they learned also a lot from us, is, well, what do we see in the field? And what we saw in the field was very much different than the laboratory, because you can watch two mafia guys talking to each other. You will never see a behavior that in any way communicates that there's deception. It just doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen with professional intelligence officers because there's too much at stake. And so while, we saw a lot of research with college students, it was much different in the criminal world. And so that's where we began to also contribute to the literature at that time.
You say if you're looking at two professional people in the mafia and you are reading their behaviors, they don't indicate deception because of training. Do they truly not indicate deception, or is it just more subtle? Were you all able to say, well, I do see a gesture there, even though it's subtle? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. First of all, it goes to your question. There is no Pinocchio effect. There is no single behavior indicative of deception. What we see sometimes is you ask a question and then somebody shows anxiety or psychological discomfort. And you certainly see that with children when you ask them, did you break that lamp? And they say no, but their chin comes down and their head is bowed. And okay, we got it. But adults don't do that. And certainly criminals in the mafia, you're not going to see any of these behaviors because lying is a tool for social survival. And so they become very effective liars. What we try to do with people like that is we use nonverbals in a different way. We use it by asking questions that they probably never thought of and then seeing if it causes a cognitive load. In other words, does a simple question like, well, that's great, but where were you last night at 9 p.m.? Does that cause any kind of hesitation? But even then, I mean, I've been up against some of the best Russian spies and, they're just so smooth. Their answers are right there. So it's very difficult.
Well, Kat, let's take a quick break from the show to talk about the billions of things that are going on.
Well, it's a very exciting 2019 right around the corner.
It is. Can you believe that, actually?
I honestly can't. I really, truly am having trouble with it.
Yeah, my brain kind of broke when we just were talking, and it's like, oh, that will be next year, not just next month.
Yeah.
Whew. Okay, well, let's talk about what's coming up then in the next year. Well, let's just talk a little bit about what just happened. If you signed up for and sat through the SECTF webinar, then you heard us talking about the social engineering villages and capture the flags over 2018 period. That is now uploaded and online. So you can download that or go take a look at the video and the report on social-engineer.org if you would like to do that. Let's talk about some corporate events coming up. Right, starting off the year really good. On February 4 through 8, we have our Advanced Practical Social Engineering course in sunny Orlando. Kat and I will be there together teaching that class. So if you want to see either of us and learn some awesome social engineering things, come on over to Orlando. Get in that class before it's full.
Yeah, and you may actually get a little reprieve if you live in a cold environment in the wonderful warmth of Florida.
That is a beautiful idea. Then if you are interested in our OSINT course, Ryan and Colin will be teaching 23 through 24 of April in beautiful Denver, Colorado, which in April in Colorado is going to be amazing weather. Also a really nice area to be in. That's a 2-day course out there. You can find that on the website. And if you're in Europe, London, or in America and want to fly over or anywhere else in the world, 13 through 17 of May, we are teaching our Advanced Practical Social Engineering course in Bristol, UK. Now, quick note on that. We already have a few seats filled in that class, and we have a hard limit. Whereas in Orlando, we can expand a little. In Bristol, we have a hard limit on the number. So if you don't want to miss out on that class, I say sign up earlier than later, and that's in May of 2019. If you would, please check out my new book, Social Engineering, The Science of Human Hacking. It's on Amazon. I'm really, really happy with that book. If you read the first one, you'll see a lot of new updates to that, so you can check that out. We have a lot of people asking questions about, so I'll just tell you if you want to know more about our nonprofit foundation, where we unmask anonymous online child predators. It is called the Innocent Lives Foundation. That can be found at innocentlivesfoundation.org. We'll be talking more about that, of course, in the future. One last thing before we go, if you could just take a moment to head over to iTunes or other platforms that you listen to this podcast on, like Spotify or any of the Android platforms, and leave us a really good rating. That helps us to kind of expand places that our podcast will be and be featured. So we appreciate that. Thanks very much. And I guess we'll get back to the show. A lot of times when we read research, we realize that it's a controlled environment. They are using either college kids or sometimes even younger people. So that makes it much different than what you experience in my world is not the criminal world, but in the business world even. You know, people who maybe commonly use the practice of lying to make a sale or something, they're going to be so attuned to it that it's going to be really hard to pick up on baseline changes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it. 97% of all law enforcement interviews are done on the street. 97%. They're not sitting down in a classroom with lights and cameras and it's pristine and it's on the street. It's usually at night because most interviews take place, on the swing shift between 4 p.m. and 2 a.m. That's when most activity takes place. So it's low light. There's a lot of activity and maybe there's others present, which, affects the observations. And even in business, I've been in a lot of meetings where, in comes an entourage of 6 or 7 people and they're sitting on one side. Now you've got 6 or 7 on the other side. And there's the interplay of not just the facts, but the emotions. I've sat in on meetings between, school boards and unions. And let me tell you something. There are a lot of emotions that are at play and totally mask anything that we would even come close to describing as, there's deception here. Yet get away from that. We're dealing with highly emotional people.
If you're listening to this podcast and you're like, man, I really want to know more about nonverbals, but it sounds so complicated, and obviously someone like you has been doing it since, way before Kat even believes there were humans on Earth.
Apparently. I learned this about myself today.
Poor Kat. Stop picking on Kat. Kat's everybody's favorite, so don't do that.
She really is. Yeah, she is. What would you tell someone where to start? Like, would you just say, like, just start looking for comfort versus discomfort? Or is there one particular thing where a person can start to get into using these skills more
Yeah.
easily?
Chris, for having had our conversation 8 years ago, you remember a lot. So I'm proud and honored. I think that one of the things that I've always tried to do with my books is to simplify the what I perceive as complex, and nonverbals can be complex. And I think, as you said, one of the easiest ways to see it is we humans are very good at sensing or detecting or observing when there's comfort and discomfort. You certainly see it the minute a baby is born. It's shaking, it's crying, and it's effectively transmitting, hey, dummy, hold me, warm me, feed me. Okay, got it. Very effective. We're very binary. The minute we are uncomfortable, we begin to display that. So I would say master the behaviors of discomfort. Certainly in the business world, where you see neck touching, lip compression, facial massaging. I think I have something like 168 discomfort behaviors that just between the forehead and the neck. Look for these behaviors so that you don't have to think about it. And you say, you know what? That person just shifted their jaw as I'm talking to them, jaw shifting, there's something wrong here, there's an issue. But then we also look for, all right, how do we build on that? Well, there's displays of confidence. Is the person taking up space, or are they becoming narrower with their body posture and with their hands? If we ask them questions, if we ask them due diligence questions, and they begin to shrink up, is there something at issue? And this literally happened. I was working with a client in New York. They were going to invest in this huge building. And actually, somebody had lied about whether or not they had had infestations with mold. When the questions began to be asked about, had there ever been any kind of mold issues or anything like that, because they started to notice that there had been some fresh painting and so forth. And this gentleman went from, sitting with his elbows out to his elbows were tucked in, and now he's massaging his hands. And so we see this high degree of discomfort, but also this lack of confidence. And all that tells you is not that they're lying, but there is an issue. So we look for confidence and lack of confidence. We look for emphasis and lack of emphasis. We look for intention cues. Something so simple as you're talking to someone and all of a sudden you find that maybe their right foot or their left foot orients towards an exit. You don't have to wait for them to say, hey, I got to go, or they begin to look at their watch. The very minute that foot orients towards an exit, that person has to leave. So there are intention cues in the same way that you see a child leaning into the glass window looking at candy, and things that attract us, things that repel us. So I've tried to, in my book, simplify it. And definitely in the dictionary of body language, I've tried to divide it up so that as you work your way down from the forehead down to the toes, you can look at the behavior and say, all right, where does this fit in? Is it comfort, discomfort? Is it confidence? Is it emphasis? Or is it the opposite?
What I loved about that was, because this is something we talk about often with people who ask questions like that to us, is to not make snap judgments. Like you said, like just because you see that, you can't jump and say, oh, that person's lying, or that person has to go use the bathroom. You don't know why that foot went towards the door. All you know is that that's saying, hey, I need to go that way. So you can be kind, notice that, don't call them out on it. Say, hey, look, I saw your foot just moved. That indicates you want to leave. What's going on? But just make it easy for them to make an exit. I thought that was really good advice.
I try never to reveal what I have seen. If I see that foot orient towards an exit, I may just look at the person and ask, how are you doing on time? Do you have a minute, or do you have to
Mm-hmm.
go? If I sense that there's an issue, I don't confront them by saying, oh, I see that you have an issue. I pick their brains. I ask them questions. If you see somebody, like I said earlier, maybe they're pursing their lips, or even more dramatic, You see the dramatic lip pull where they purse their lips forward, but then they pull them to the side of the face, which is really a sign of strong rejection or negativity. I'm not going to say, oh, I just saw that, I know what it means. What I usually try to do is ask, well, what do you think? What a great way to really get into someone's head is really by asking them and being receptive to what they may have to say, but not waste their time. Here's one of the things, Chris, I've learned over time, and I think you and Kat would agree with this. Oftentimes, people just want to talk. They're seeing behaviors that are saying, you know what, I'm not believing this, or I have my own issues, or there's lack of credibility here. But they continue to talk because it's pro forma, rather than saying, let me go off script and let me hear what you have to say. And that respects the other person's time.
I think it's interesting parallel some of the parts that you just described and or directly applicable to social engineering. The idea that in my head, Paul Ekman is, a micro expression. You can see everything and it's the superpower, your knowledge of body language and gestures to be that same kind of superpower. But I think it's really fascinating because it doesn't sound like it's a one-stop answer. It is often a lot like our open source intelligence research. Before we go into an investigation, we do all the background research and then we come in more prepared. So the body language isn't giving you answers, but it is telling you and indicating how to navigate through the conversation to get to the answers that you want. That makes sense. And I think that's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I think you have a good point. The only thing that nonverbals do is they often reveal the true sentiments, which we are reluctant to express. Most people, if you ask, how's your day? Everything is fine. Well, most of the time that works, but boy, today your shoulders are slumped and your chin is down and your eyelids can't even rise. There's something there. I'm not going to sit there and hammer you trying to find out what it is. But I'll say this, hey, stop by if you want to chat later, and you give that opportunity. But, in the area of social engineering, I mean, when I'm looking at an individual that I may potentially be talking to or in the room with, I'm looking at social media and saying, has this person talked before? So I can pick up on how they talk, how they deliver, how emphatic they are. I begin to build my nonverbal intelligence on this person based on things that I have already seen. Why? Well, for one thing, we know that synchrony is harmony. And if they like to talk really fast, well, I'm going to have to rise to the occasion. If they like to slow things down and they're very pensive, well, I'm going to have to build in some breaks. So this begins to tell me how to communicate effectively, but I'm also looking for things that say, when this woman or this man has difficulty with something, here's a behavior that I may see. And if I see it, then it tells me I need to pursue it further.
So if you don't have that, like let's say they have nothing on the internet. They don't even have a social media presence on Facebook or anything. You can't even see how they communicate in 140 characters. Then what do you do for a baseline?
Well, the baseline is obviously the ideal in an ideal situation, but those are so rare. I mean, I remember pulling into a bank robbery in Phoenix, Arizona, and all of a sudden now the suspect has left. There's 6 cashiers there. Yes, Kat, there was a time when there would be 6 cashiers in a bank.
Good to know.
It wasn't all machines, Kat. It wasn't all machines.
Money didn't just come from a machine. There were,
from people's hands.
And I remember all these people were so emotionally charged because of what had just happened. I had to try to calm them down, but even then, 20, 30, 40 minutes on, you could still tell that they're stressed. You may never have a perfect model. What I try to tell students is that, catalog all the observations, but these are only instructive. They're not definitive. Nothing is definitive until you somehow are able to prove it. Just like the woman that was shaking her ankle, It wasn't until she spoke up and said, I have a bone to pick with you. Whoa. I said, okay. So, she was agitated, and this is a form of displaying agitation. She was upset. Use the information only to give guidance, but always know that it's not definitive. And I'll give you an example. White collar crime case I was asked to help with. Woman comes in. I sit her down, and the first 20 or so minutes you spend as an FBI agent just calming the person down because, they're used to watching television and, oh my gosh, it's the FBI and they're scared and all this stuff. But as the interview progresses, I notice that, she's ventilating her hair. She's lip biting. There's some jaw shifting, lip compression, touching of the neck, all indicators that there's growing anxiety. And I haven't even begun to ask her about the case. And so I finally said, ma'am, you look like there's something you want to get off your chest. And she says, Mr. Navarro, when I parked downstairs, I only had 2 quarters and the meter's running out. And think about it. I'm seeing all these behaviors that I'm sure some people would say, oh, she's being deceptive. I mean, she's biting her lip. Oh my gosh,
she's guilty of the crime.
She ventilated her hair twice. I mean, let's convict her. No.
She just doesn't want to get a parking ticket.
She doesn't want to get a parking ticket. And so, we go downstairs. She didn't have any money. I put some money in the meter. And as it turns out, somebody had stolen her ID. And so this was a life lesson for me.
Wow, that's a great story, actually. I was waiting for you to be like, then we got all the secrets out of her and she stole all the money.
Yeah, but as it turned out, she wasn't involved. But all the behaviors were there. And that's why I tell people, don't ignore the behaviors. You're making observations, but what is it of? I'll tell you where it was useful. As you know, I caught a spy based on nonverbals where I went to talk to him. This was in my book that was written in that 8-year period called 3 Minutes to Doomsday. And it's an actual espionage case where I went to talk to someone who was just stationed at a base in Germany. He was living in Tampa, Florida at the time. And when I went to talk to him, I just mentioned the name of an individual that had been arrested in Germany a few days earlier. And when I mentioned that name, his cigarette shook in his hand. Now, why would a cigarette shake in your hand of just somebody? We talked about other things. I was there with the Army intelligence, and then we mentioned the name again, and his cigarette shook again. Now, I know enough about the brain to know that when we are stressed or threatened, that it causes us to become jittery. So we began an investigation just based on that shaking cigarette. That led us to a 10-year investigation and the arrest of a total of 8 people, 4 of them in the United States. And it was really based on body language, not that they were being deceptive, but it told us that there was something wrong.
That is really interesting. Joe, I'm super curious about your personal process and how you've noticed it change over the years. You mentioned that you were very good at reading body language when you were a kid and you relied on that, but I'm sure that it shifted from doing it innately to understanding it to teaching it, essentially going up like Maslow's or like the hierarchy of learning. Did you ever notice a tangible shift in yourself when those changes occurred?
I love that question, Kat. I don't think I've ever been asked that, but what is my methodology? And the methodology, I think, is over the years, I became more focused, but also I was more dedicated to seeking out what the experts had to say. People say, well, you've read 4,000 books in the last 5 decades. Why? Because there's so much knowledge out there, and I'm not going to experience it all. Earlier this year, I read a book about dolphins and orcas and stuff like that. And well, what does that have to do with body language? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. It's like I find people that only read in this very one narrow area, and there's so much out there. Earlier, we were conversing about books that I would recommend. The Biological Mind by Jasanoff, the book called Sapiens, A Brief History of Mankind by Yuval Noah Harari, or Who We Are and How We Got Here by David Reich. Why would I read that? You just never know where you're going to learn even a small morsel that's so enriching. And what I found was that I became very disciplined. And I think successful people are disciplined. If I learned anything about reading about Thomas Jefferson, about Thomas Edison, the inventor, the Wright brothers, anybody who has been successful is disciplined. You cannot achieve mastery of anything if you are not disciplined. And I think over the last 4 or 5 decades, I have gradually become more and more and more disciplined. Really, that's the only way you can write 13 books in 15 years.
Fair.
Yeah, it's like almost a book a year.
And why is that? It's because I'm disciplined enough to write anywhere from 4 to 5 hours every day, to read on average about 2 books a week. And for me, that's what it takes. But I've been around a lot of successful business people, and they have a methodology. They are focused in their own way, and they're dedicated in their own way. And I have to say, you also have to balance it with family. Your family has to become a part of that focus so that you're attentive to them. I think at this stage of my life, I'm a much better human being than earlier in my life, where maybe I was focused on learning or work, and now it's all blended together in learning, family, and work.
Yeah, it is amazing how a little bit of experience and age will change you on that too. I've gone through that same thing. Family has to really be so important in that, or what does a success mean if you don't have your family with you?
How often
once
do
you
we
achieve
see
it?
where somebody has phenomenal business success, but then they're having problems with relationships and so forth? So I think if there's any one thing that we can change as humans, is how dedicated we become to one thing and becoming more focused. I would have to say that's something that we can all achieve, and it doesn't cost any money.
Very poetic.
That's awesome. I tried to capture the 3 names of those books because, as you know, I was going to ask you, but you mentioned them already, but I want to get them down. So I had Biological Mind, and who wrote that?
Yeah, The Biological Mind was recommended to me, and I love it because it was written by Alan Jasanoff, and it really looks at how, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on the brain itself nowadays, but the body and the environment, everything is interacting together. When we think of neurons, we think of neurons only in the brain. Think about how many neurons are in our stomachs. If you Google this, if you search this, your jaw is going to drop. We have neurons in our stomach interconnected to the brain through the vagus nerve. And so sometimes you get this gut feeling when you're around somebody you don't like and so forth. We have just begun to understand how the environment, even our skin, is communicating with our brain. And I remember being on vacation with my wife, and the breeze was brushing up against these very tiny hairs that we have on our faces, and just sitting there and saying, okay, I am really taking in this environment. And I think of these cultures that live much simpler lives, and how much richer their lives are because they can hear the birds sing and the wind and all these things. But they're all communicating with us and through us, and it's part of being human.
I did not know that we had neurons in our stomachs, and that does make the gut feeling that we get about people we don't like so much more clear and understandable why that would be so real and so important to listen to. And then I had Sapien by Noah Harari.
Oh, yeah, Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. And it's a brief history of humankind, and it's titled Sapiens. This is a deep dive into, everything from the time we were early hominins, proto-humans, and here we are living in a time period 1,000 to 70,000 years ago where we are present, humans are present, Homo sapiens are present, but so are Neanderthals. There's this admixture of both human and Neanderthal, and of course now we carry somewhere between 2 and 3% of Neanderthal DNA. Fascinating read. Absolutely love the book. And then who we are and how we got here. It looks at our ancient DNA. And this was by David Reich. Love that book also because it really gets into the science of DNA and how the populations were transmitted out the world by the movement of these people 150,000 years ago. I get it into my head, okay, I want to explore everything about this particular topic. I remember in the 80s, I said, I'm going to take a year to study the Byzantine Empire. And that's how I tend to do it. I don't recommend it because people think you're nuts having 20 books on the same topic. But that's the way I tend to do it. I try to do a deep dive. And then when I do about 42, 45 events a year worldwide, I try to share that knowledge with others, just like both of you do. It doesn't really matter if I know these things. It only matters if I share these things with others, and hopefully they will develop a love or an understanding that maybe they don't have at the moment.
That's phenomenal. So if people want to see you at one of these events, or if they want to follow you or get some training from you, what's the best way for people to find out more about your work?
Thank you for asking that. They can go to joenavarro.net, and that's all, one word, joenavarro.net. It'll take them to my website and books, my videos, some of the training things, and a lot of free articles. I have a lot of articles that I've written over the years, topping somewhere around 70, 80,000 words on the topic of nonverbals, and they're welcome to them. So,
and you do a lot of writing also in some serious journals, like I know you did some in the Harvard Review.
Yeah, I did for one of the law reviews, and of course for Psychology Today. I'm like you. Both of you have curious minds. I have a curious mind. I'm never satisfied, and I'm always looking and learning, and I like to share, which is what both of you do. So that's our burden.
Yeah, well, I'll take it. I'll take it over other burdens, right?
Yeah, let's just not do it every 10 years. Can we do it more often, please?
Yeah, I'm good with that. I'm really good with that. Joe, as always, the time has flown by. It's was fascinating. I want to just thank you personally for this book. I probably was one of the ones who was nagging you and begging you to write it, and now you did eventually and finally, and I have it. And I'm sure if whoever's listening to this doesn't have it, they're gonna go out and get it now, because it really is a very, very useful book if you're into body language at all.
Well, apparently he always had it written. He just finally packaged it for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have also taken your personal journals too. I mean, that would have been really cool.
We do like reading through other people's stuff. That is a professional hazard.
All right, yes. I'll admit this. I said to myself, okay, Kat is finally ready for this book to come out.
That was it. Yeah.
I'm flattered to be your catalyst.
I read that in the introduction, Yeah, I did. See the way you've affected the industry.
Oh, yes, I try. I do my small part.
Yeah.
Very good. Thanks again. Thank you.
Man, I love having that guy on the show. I really do.
He is literally amazing. Like, I could have spoken with him for hours.
That's not even a joke. We could have went for hours if he didn't have another meeting. I think he also could have went. We were just having a great conversation.
Yeah, now it's my life goal to orchestrate this dinner party where like all our great podcast guests come and everybody is just like playing their professional expertise against one another.
Can you imagine what that would be like? It would be like a giant, the Princess Bride when they had that big match between, I can't remember the characters now.
I'm going to fail. I've seen it like 4 times in the last 2 years too, which is awful.
Yeah, it's cute.
But yeah, like can you imagine like Joe, Ian, Roland, like Nick, Neil all in one place? That would be a baller dinner party.
That would be amazing. That needs to happen at some point.
I really want to make it happen.
The battle of the wits.
Yeah, like cold reading versus body language. Go.
Yeah. What I love about the things that he was mentioning is we joked about the whole time. I haven't spoken in 8 years formally. We've done through email and phone and things like that. But to hear the messaging that he has, like towards like, hey, just because you could see the what doesn't mean you know the why. Just because you could read someone's body language doesn't mean you know why they're feeling that. I love that messaging because it just kind of solidifies everything we do in training. And then to hear it from one of the industry greats, the people who really help make this industry what it is, kind of just solidifies, hey, we're not stupid. We're actually doing the right thing. And it's really, really validating to have him on there and hear all the things that he has to say.
I think it's also further validating that he is such a curious person. And that is kind of where he hangs his hat to an extent of like, this is how I am who I am is because of my curiosity. And like, we need to balance it with family and friends and other parts of our lives. Because I truly believe I've heard you say, Paul Ekman say that, you say it, like so many people who are very good in this realm of reading people and working with people value the relationships. I think it's just so important to bear in mind that these are life skills. They're not just professional skills. And, every aspect of who you are and every aspect of your professional realm do come together to make you, and that it is pervasive throughout life. I don't know. I thought that what he said in many ways was very profound and fascinating.
Yeah. I think it's also a good lesson too, because I love that part when he says success without your family really is just kind of a waste of time.
Yeah.
And it really is, so if you have, so what, you go out and you make millions of dollars and you're well known and you're famous, whatever, for writing books and doing all these things, but you don't have a family to share that happiness with. What does it all mean?
Yeah. Who's going to retire on that yacht with you? Yachts by yourself are boring.
Yes. They sound boring. That was a great, great interview. Personally learned some new things. I'm telling you, everyone, if you don't have this book, you got to go pick it up. It's really small. It's kind of like on the line of Robin Dreek's, the top 10 techniques to building rapport. It's not all about me. People always comment like, that book's so small, you can read it really fast. You can kind of use it as a reference guide. I feel that that's exactly what Joe has done. He's made a reference guide for us, and you can just flip open to a page and check for that piece that you just saw someone display and say, oh, now I understand what it means.
It's awesome and so crazy because honestly, since I've been working professionally with you and curating these skills more, I look around in the airport, I look at people, I wonder what's going on. And he basically just made like the bird watching guide for people.
That's a great analogy. That's exactly what it is. It is the bird watching guide. That's a people watching guide. That's what he should have called it.
Yeah. I'm just going to be sitting in the airport now with my little flip book being like, oh, let's look that up.
That may actually become the title of this podcast, The People Watching Guide with Joe Navarro. Well, if you want to follow us, you got Kat Murdoch on Twitter at
Kat Murdoch. That's a 0 for the O, and my name starts with a C, not a K.
Yes, that's a good one to know because I've had people misspell it before. So Thank you for mentioning that.
That's my plight.
I am Human Hacker, and our corporate is SOC Engineer Inc. Our website is social-engineer.org for all the podcasts, newsletters, and other free stuff like our framework, and also social-engineer.com for all of our corporate-y stuff. I guess we will talk to you. Whoa, wait, hang on. Next year's podcast is going to be into a whole new year.
Whoa.
Next month's podcast is going to be a whole new year. So we'll talk to you all next year.
Stare into the embers on the 1st of November and remember you were born.